Trump, the pinnacle of conservative betrayal, the most socialist president of the past 30 years through an objectivist lens. Trump is a socialist. Ayn Rand's Objectivism offers the only consistent, principled framework for evaluating political economy. Capitalism is the system of laissez-faire grounded in individual rights to life, liberty, and property, and the pursuit of happiness through voluntary trade and rational self-interest. Any government intervention beyond the protection of rights, whether regulation, tariff, subsidies, redistribution, or mandates, constitutes statism, a creeping form of socialism that sacrifices the individual to the collective, whether class, nation, or public interest. The United States has long operated a mixed economy, a hybrid of residual capitalism and escalating statism, which Rand identified as the mortal enemy of freedom precisely because it evades the fundamental choice, capitalism or statism. Classical collectivism, full state ownership, is not required for socialism. The mixed economy is socialism in practice, as it institutionalizes the principle that some men's lives and earnings belong to others via coercive government power. Rand's devastating critique of conservatives and the Republican Party exposes why they have been more dangerous to capitalism than overt liberals. In her 1960 essay, Conservatism, an Obituary, she declared that conservatives dare not advocate or defend capitalism because they are paralyzed by its clash with dominant morality of altruism, the doctrine that man has no right to exist for his own sake and must sacrifice for others. Liberals smuggled in statism openly via euphemisms like the welfare state or New Deal. But conservatives attempt the more reprehensible feat by defending freedom by stealth. They preserve the mixed economy's blend of residual freedom and welfare statism, conceding altruism's premises while offering no moral defense of individualism based on reason. They evade the issue with arguments from faith, capitalism rests on God, not rights, tradition, defend the status quo because it's old, or depravity. Men are too flawed for freedom to fully be trusted, so limited statism is a necessary evil. The result, conservatives conserve nothing but the cancer-devouring capitalism, disarming rational opposition and accelerating collapse into full statism. The conservatives are trying to defend freedom by stealth. Rand wrote, "If the liberals are afraid to identify their program, there's something more reprehensible still in the conservatives' hypocrisy." This pattern of Republican Me Tooism, corporate welfare, protectionism, entitlement preservation, and moral compromise has defined the party since the Rand's era. Over the past 30 years, roughly the Clinton through Trump administrations, every president advanced the mixed economy. Democrats, Clinton expansions, Obama's Affordable Care Act, and stimulus did so explicitly. Republicans, Bush Medicare, Part D, and TARP bailouts did so under the guise of conservatism. But Trump's 2017 to 2021 presidency stands as the most socialist in this period, despite his Republican label, but because of it. Trump embodied the ultimate conservative betrayal. He welded Republican rhetoric of freedom and of American first to impose the heaviest doses of economic nationalism, coercive redistribution, and unchecked statism since the pre-Reagan era, while refusing to challenge the welfare state core. In objectivist terms, his policies sacrificed individual rights and free markets to the collective nation, producers over consumers, and short-term political expediency over reason, advancing the mixed economy further under the camouflage of conservatism than any predecessor. Consider protectionism, the most blatant form of statism Rand condemned. In The Roots of War in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, she stated unequivocally, the essence of capitalism's foreign policy is free trade, i.e. the abolition of trade barriers, of protective tariffs, of special privileges, the opening of the world's trade routes to free international exchange and competition among the private citizens of all countries. Tariffs are government's coercion. They forcibly raise costs for consumers and downstream industries to subsidize inefficient domestic producers, violating rights and distorting voluntary trade. Trump's tariffs, 25% on steel and aluminum with global and targeted expansions, escalating duties on China's reaching billions in scope, and threats against allies, represented an unprecedented reversal of post-World War II free trade norms. Unlike Bush or Obama, who use targeted remedies sparingly, target weaponized tariffs as core policy, sparking retaliatory trade wars that harm American exporters and raise consumer prices across the board. Objectivists rightly call this immoral, indefensible, and illiberal. It is statism favoring special interests, steel, agriculture, manufacturing lobbies at the expense of the individual's right to trade freely. This was not incidental. It flowed from Trump's nationalist collectivism, America First, as a tribal premise that treats the nation as an entity with the rights superior to the individuals. Rand rejected all collectivism, whether internationalist, global welfare, or nationalist. Trump's version echoes the conservative argument from tradition and depravity: protect our workers and industries because foreigners or global markets threaten the collective good. The result was crony statism on a scale that dwarfed prior Republican interventions. Farm subsidies ballooned under Trump, with repeated bailout packages for agriculture hit by its own trade war. Direct transfers from taxpayers to favored producers, preserving the mixed economy welfare for politically connected sectors that conservatives had long tolerated but never escalated so aggressively. Trump's fiscal record sealed his status as the most socialist. The CARES Act 2020 and related COVID relief poured trillions into direct stimulus checks, paycheck protection program, loans, many foreign grants, for forgiven grants, unemployed expansions, and corporate bailouts. Classic altruistic redistribution, forcing productive citizens to subsidize others via government fiat. Deficits exploded to historic peacetime levels, far outpacing Obama's stimulus and raw interventionism during a crisis. Yet Trump refused any structural reform to the entitlement core. He repeatedly vowed to protect Social Security and Medicare at all costs, rejecting privatization or means testing that even some conservatives had floated. Rand viewed these programs as legalized plunder, the welfare state's embodiment of altruism, where the state seizes earnings for unearned benefits. One may reclaim one's own forced contributions and restitution while opposing the system, but advocating for preserving them, as Trump did, makes one complicit in statism. By shielding these sacred cows while adding layers of tariffs, subsidies, and emergency spending, Trump entrenched the mixed economy more deeply than Bush, Medicare Part D alone, or Clinton, who at least signed welfare reform. Tax cuts without spending restraint merely shifted the burden, accelerating debt finance statism. Compare explicitly across the 30 years. Clinton advanced NAFTA, more free trade than Trump, and welfare reform, tempering some statism despite tax hikes. Bush, Medicare expansion and TARP corporate welfare, blatant Republican betrayal, but narrower than Trump's global tariffs and pandemic largesse. Obama, ACA mandates and stimulus, overt statism, yet framed as progressive. His trade policy avoided Trump's scale protectionism. Trump, combined Republican camouflage with the broadest intervention, protectionism, anti-free trade statism, massive handouts, altruistic redistribution, entitlement preservation, mixed economy status quo, and executive overreach in trade and spending. His American First nationalism reframed collectivism as a patriotic virtue, discrediting capitalism more effectively than Democrats' explicit appeals because it became from the party claiming to defend markets. Rand warned that conservatives' guilty evasiveness and apologetic timidity would destroy capitalism by stealth. Trump fulfilled this prophecy. He projected strength and anti-statism rhetoric while delivering the most comprehensive expansion of government economic control under Republican banner since the New Deal. He did not shrink government. He redirected it toward nationalist ends, favoring American producers, workers, and industries via force. This is socialism in the mixed economy variation. The principle that individual rights yield to collective national interest enforced by tariffs, subsidies, deficits, and preserved entitlements. Objectivism demands radical capitalism, not conservative compromise. Trump's presidency proved Rand's obituary prophetic. The Republican Party, at its best, under his leadership, conserved and expanded statism more insidiously than any Democrat because it clothed altruism and coercion in capitalist rhetoric. The past 30 years slide into deeper mixed economy reached its zenith here, not in open liberalism, but in the stealthy betrayal of those who claim to fight it. Only a moral revolution for rational individualism can reverse it. Anything less, as Rand foretold, accelerates the obituary of freedom. Exploring Ayn Rand's critique of altruism, the moral code of sacrifice and death. Ayn Rand's critique of altruism stands as one of the most radical and uncompromising elements of objectivism. Far from a mere rejection of kindness or helping others, it targets the foundational moral premise that has dominated Western ethics for centuries, the doctrine that man's highest virtue is self-sacrifice. Rand does not attack benevolence, goodwill, or voluntary generosity. She attacks the ethical system that demands them as a duty at the expense of one's life, values, and happiness. In her words, altruism is the ethical theory which regards man as a sacrificial animal, which holds that man has no right to exist for his own sake, that sacrifice to others is the only justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice is the highest moral duty, virtue, and value. This definition appears repeatedly across her works, most systematically in the Objectivist Ethics, the lead essay in The Virtue of Selfishness, 1964, and is compiled exhaustively in Ayn Rand's lexicon. Altruism for Rand is not a vague call to be nice. It is irreducible primary, is self-immolation, self-abnegation, self-denial, self-destruction, which means the self as standard of evil, the selfless as the standard of good. It inverts morality entirely. Any action for one's own benefit is evil. Any action for others' benefit is good, regardless of the content of the action or rationality of the beneficiary. The beneficiary, not the value, becomes the sole criterion. The why that altruism cannot answer. Rand's most devastating opening salvo is epistemological and metaphysical. Why must man live for others? No philosopher in history has ever provided a rational answer. It is only mysticism that can permit moralists to get away with it. She writes, reason and altruism are incompatible. Altruism rests on faith, whim, feeling, and revelation, never on the facts of reality or man's nature as a rational, volitional being whose life must be sustained by his own effort. Nature does not provide automatic survival. Man must produce values, food, shelter, and knowledge through thought and work. To declare that concern with one's own interest as evil is to declare that man's desire is to live is evil. No doctrine can be more evil than that, Rand declares, yet that is precisely altruism's meaning. It holds death as the ultimate goal and standard of value. Renunciation, resignation, suffering, and self-destruction become its virtues. Incompatibility with human survival and morality. Because life is an end in itself and requires constant self-sustaining action, any code that treats the self as evil and sacrifice as a good is anti-life. Altruism substitutes society, others, or the common good as the standard circular abstractions that evade definition. It creates moral cannibalism, the premise that man's happiness necessitates another's injury. Trade, value for value, by mutual consent, is replaced by sacrifice, producers to moochers, the able to the unabled, the rational to the irrational. This code cannot sustain human society. It penalizes virtue, rationality, productivity, and pride, and rewards vice, need, weakness, incompetence. The result is not cooperation, but conflict, guilt, and eventual collapse. Rand points to the historical record, the Dark Ages, the collectivist horrors of the 20th century, Soviet Union, the German National Socialists, all embodiments of altruism in practice. Through centuries of scourges and disasters brought about by your code of morality, you have cried that your code had been broken. You damned man, you damned existence, you damned this earth, but never dared to question your code. Altruism destroys the very possibility of objective values. Without a rational standard, man's life qua man, ethics becomes subjective, faith instinct, or majority whim. It hands a blank check to any need, any demand, any collective. The producer's life becomes mortgaged to every beggar, every public interest, every state planner. The contrast, rational selfishness, egoism. Objectivism offers the only alternative, a morality of rational self-interest. Man's life is the standard of value. His own happiness is his highest moral purpose. Virtues, rationality, independence, integrity, honesty, justice, productiveness, pride are not duties to others, but the practical means of achieving one's own survival and flourishing. Selfishness, properly understood, means concern with one's own interests, evaluated by reason, not whim, not looting, not exploitation. Rand rejects both the brute's sacrifice of others to self and the altruist's sacrifice of self to others. Both are forms of selflessness. True egoism demands no sacrifice of anyone to anyone. It upholds voluntary trade among equals. Happiness becomes non-contradictory joy for the achievement of rational values, not the guilt-ridden joy of the altruist who must pretend that self-destruction is fulfillment. The objectivist ethics proudly advocates and upholds rational selfishness, which means the values required for man's survival, quote man. It rejects the package deal that equates selfishness with evil and selfishness with good. In the virtue of selfishness, Rand clears the ground. The popular image of the self-brute trampling corpse is a smear. The dictionary definition is neutral. Ethics must judge whether rational concern for one's interest is good, it is, or evil, it is not. Psychological and cultural destruction. Altruism's psychological toll is total. It produces men without self-esteem. The first concern is not how to live, but how to sacrifice. It breeds resentment. Givers are never blessed. More is always demanded. It destroys authentic benevolence. If valuing another is selfless, then love, admiration, and respect become threats to one's moral status. Guilt becomes a stock in trade. Moral innocence is impossible. Rand identifies altruism as a tool of appeasement for those who fear the loneliness of independent thought. Intellectuals and creators sacrifice their convictions to gain the approval of the collective. I'm using my mind only to serve you, thus disarming reason in the face of mysticism and force. The ultimate climax is the injunction of don't judge, which hands a moral blank check to any atrocity committed in the name of need. Culturally, altruism creates value deprivation, a gray fog of duty, endless demands, and the erasure of personal purpose. It makes impossible the recognition of virtue or achievement. Only the weak, the suffering, the zero have moral claim. Political and economic ramifications. Because altruism declares every individual morally the property of others, it is incompatible with individual rights, freedom, or capitalism. The consistent political expression of altruism is collectivism in any variant: socialism, Italian fascism, communism, German National Socialism, the welfare state, where the state enforces sacrifice by force. Every man is morally the property of others. Justice, they conclude, social justice demands the initiation of force against the non-sacrificial individual. Capitalism and altruism cannot coexist. One rests on the rational self-interest and voluntary trade, the other on sacrifice and coercion. The mixed economy is not a compromise, but a betrayal of capitalism's moral base, sustained by altruistic premises that conservatives and liberals alike accept. Only a morality of rational egoism can support laissez-faire. Conclusion. Why Rand's critique matters. Common objections. That Rand misdefines altruism as mere self-sacrifice, or that she opposes all helping. Misses the point. She distinguishes clearly voluntary charity from rational values as possible and moral under egoism. Coerced or duty-bound sacrifice is not. The smear that her egoism equals brutality ignores her explicit rejection of whim and force. Her critiques evade the core. Altruism has never been rationally justified. It demands the surrender of the mind, the self, and the earth. Rand's critique is not negative but revolutionary. She is exposing altruism as the morality of death. She clears the way for morality of life, reason, purpose, and self-esteem, and the sovereign individual. In an age still drenched in altruistic platitudes, global welfare, entitlement states, systematic demands for sacrifice, her analysis remains the only consistent defense of man's right to exist for his own sake. To accept altruism is to accept a blank check on your life drawn by every need. To reject it is to declare, I am not a sacrificial animal. That declaration is the first step toward a genuinely human existence. Thank you for joining today's video. See you in the next video.